The time was 1985. The place was Macau. In the port of Mutya, there was a Chinese restaurant called the Eight Immortals. Connected to the hotel of the same name, the Eight Immortals started as a street stand, owned and operated by an entrepreneur named Zhang Lin. Before its evolution into a full-fledged sit-down restaurant in the 1960s, the Eight Immortals specialized in a Cantonese brunch staple called Cha Su Bao, aka a steamed bun filled with roast barbecue-flavored pork. With his signature pork bun selling like hotcakes, Zhang Lin eventually transformed his street stand into a modest yet lucrative eatery. Securing himself a house in the immediate vicinity, Zhang Lin successfully ran the Eight Immortals alongside his wife and children, shaping it into a proper family-owned business. While the Zhang family were indeed prospering, Zhang Lin and his wife found themselves endangering their financial future thanks to a destructive gambling addiction, a personal demon that would have them crossing paths with a proper devil. During their reckless gambling spree, Mr. and Mrs. Zhang would run afoul of a man named Huang Zhiheng. Wanted for a murder he committed back in Hong Kong in 1973, Huang was a very rough and dangerous man whom trouble seemed to follow around everywhere he went. After bouncing around from place to place in order to stay ahead of the authorities, Huang eventually settled in Macau, where he became involved in the gambling rackets that would become his bread and butter, so to speak. It would be one night in 1984 that the Zhangs and Huang would become acquainted in the worst possible way. After an entire evening of high-stakes wagers, the Zhangs found themselves in debt to Huang somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 in today's money. Unable to pay off that amount of money, Huang worked out an extremely under-the-table kind of arrangement with the Zhangs. He'd give them exactly 1 year to settle their debt with him. If they still couldn't pay him, then they'd sign over the deed to the Eight Immortals to him. While it is still unknown to this day whether the Zhangs actually agreed to this arrangement or not, it is known that the couple would continue to incur more gambling debt with Huang, and by the end of the year, they owed him at least $200,000 in today's money. With that sort of money, Zhang's seemingly cavalier attitude, and Huang's growing impatience in play, something very dark was bound to happen sooner or later. On the afternoon of August 4th, 1985, a truck driver made a large delivery to the Eight Immortals. 9 members of the Zhang family, including Zhang Lin and his wife, were busy getting ready for the next day's meal service, and when the delivery driver left, they seemed to be fine. The very next morning, that same driver returned to the restaurant to make another delivery, only to discover something quite strange. The restaurant was locked up tight, and a note was left on the door indicating that the restaurant was closed for the next 3 days. Feeling that something was very wrong, the delivery driver stopped by the Zhang family home to check on them, and much to his confusion, Huang Zhiheng answered the door. He told the delivery driver that the Zhangs were out of town on a trip to the Chinese mainland and would be back in a couple of weeks. While sensing that something strange was still going on, the delivery driver decided not to press the issue further and went about his business. 4 days later, his suspicions would bear bitter fruit. On August 8th, an unlucky swimmer was spending the day at a nearby beach and made a horrifying discovery: 8 pieces of what appeared to be a human body. The local police were immediately called in to investigate, and some very gruesome discoveries were made. For starters, the medical examiner deduced that the fragmented body parts actually belonged to at least 4 different people. The police's initial theory, stemming from the medical examiner's preliminary finding, was that the pieces belonged to a group of immigrants from the mainland who were attempting to travel to Mutya, but then their boat sank and they were subsequently torn apart by sharks. But the police were forced to scrap that theory when the medical examiner turned up another clue. The pieces weren't chewed up by a shark, but were in fact carefully sliced apart by precise incisions with a very sharp knife, indicating that the victims may have been murdered. As weeks went by, more pieces turned up on nearby beaches, and the medical examiner discovered that not only were they connected to the pieces found on August 8th, they were now looking at pieces belonging to well over 10 different people. Now knowing that they were dealing with a homicide, the police began looking into recent missing persons cases to see if they could connect the body parts case to any of them. Eventually, they were able to determine that the fragmented body parts belonged to the Zhang family, who had been reported missing by relatives. including a sister of Zhang Lin's that disappeared around the same time as the rest of the family. From there, the police followed the trail back to the Eight Immortals restaurant, which at this point was up and running again and being managed by Huang Zhiheng. When questioned by police, Huang openly explained his association to the Zhang family and claimed that Zhang Lin sold him both the restaurant and the family home before leaving town. He even provided the ownership documents to the police to prove his story. While the police did indeed consider Huang's story to be fairly plausible, considering Mr. and Mrs. Zhang's bad habit of gambling with money they didn't have, they had their suspicions that Huang wasn't telling them the truth. So after some intense investigation, the police managed to get authorization to check Huang's banking information along with his safety deposit box and discovered that he had not only had possessions of the deed to the Eight Immortals and the Zhang family home, he also had some personal papers and ID cards belonging to the Zhang children, something he had no business having in his possession. After this discovery, Huang attempted to get out of town fast, but the police quickly apprehended him and he was formally charged with the murders of the Zhang family on September 28, 1986. Even though the police didn't really have any sort of concrete evidence that he had killed the Zhangs, nor did he make any sort of confession, Huang was put on trial for 10 counts of murder and was convicted on October 2nd of that year. If there was any doubt about his guilt, it was soon about to dissipate. The day after his murder conviction, Huang was taken to the hospital after being violently attacked by another inmate at the prison. After failing to escape from the hospital, Huang finally admitted defeat, sat down with investigators, and came clean about what had happened to the Zhang family. Late in the evening of August 4th, 1985, sometime after the delivery driver had left, Huang arrived at the Eight Immortals with something other than roast pork buns on his mind. He had come to collect either the money owed to him or the deed to the restaurant from Mr. and Mrs. Zhang, and he was not planning on leaving empty-handed. According to Huang's statement to police, Mr. Zhang flat out refused to pay him and refused to turn over the deed to the restaurant to him as agreed, and that caused Huang to snap. Determined to scare Mr. Zhang into giving him what he was owed, Huang broke a beer bottle and took the man's son hostage. Threatening to cut the boy's throat, Huang forced the other family members to bind and gag each other, and then repeated his demand for either the money or the deed to the restaurant. However, before Mr. Zhang could answer, one of the family members was able to remove their gag and start screaming as loud as she could. And that sealed the family's fate. According to Huang, he killed the Zhang family one by one. He stabbed some of them to death with the broken beer bottle, and after the bottle was rendered useless, he strangled the remaining family with his bare hands. After the last member of the Zhang family was dead, Huang suddenly remembered that Mr. Zhang had a sister that lived nearby that may or may not be able to finger him for the murders if he got caught. So he briefly left the restaurant, located the sister, and then lured her back to the Eight Immortals, where he quickly murdered her as well. After that was completed, Huang proceeded to spend the next 8 hours dismembering the bodies skillfully in the kitchen before carefully placing the pieces in the black garbage bags. After that, he locked up the restaurant so he could go and dispose of the bodies in the ocean and in some random dumpsters throughout the city. After that was done, he returned to the restaurant, cleaned up the mess, and cleaned out the safe that Mr. Zhang had kept on the premises. After locking up and putting the close sign up on the door, Huang decided to head on over to the Zhang family home to stay the night, where he would eventually cross paths with the delivery driver the next morning and give him the excuse that the Zhangs had gone on a trip to the mainland. 3 days later, Huang would reopen the Eight Immortals and successfully run the place until his arrest the following year. After Huang's confession to investigators, he was sent back to prison where 2 months later he would take his own life. In his suicide note, he stated that he didn't kill himself out of remorse for his actions, but to escape from his chronic asthma problems that had been exacerbated during his stay in prison. Well, after his death, it was discovered that Huang had attempted to burn off his own fingerprints in an effort to avoid being connected to any of the crimes he had previously committed. But there was just enough ridge detail left to connect him to the homicide that he committed back in Hong Kong in 1973. Another case closed. After Huang's arrest and the subsequent revelation that he had dismembered his victims in the restaurant's kitchen, urban legends began to circulate that he had baked his victims into the famous roast pork buns Sweeney Todd style, and when the Eight Immortals reopened its door 3 days after the murders, he had served them to the general public. I don't know if that's true, but I do know that the remainder of the body parts that could be identified as the Zhang family's remains were discovered in a landfill in 1989. After their discovery, the body parts were cremated and returned to the Zhang family's living relatives, who subsequently scattered the ashes out over the ocean near Macau. As for the fate of the Eight Immortals restaurant, it was shut down and seized by the authorities shortly after Huang's arrest. Months after Huang's own death, the business was sold off to where it was bounced around to numerous owners in the subsequent years that followed. According to my own research, the Eight Immortals restaurant no longer exists due to being partially demolished and converted into a parking lot for the nearby Beijing hotel that now rests upon the property. While the people involved in this horrifying tale of greed and murder are long gone and the place where it happened has been erased from existence, the dark legacy of the Eight Immortals lives on in the form of scary stories and a fictionalized account of the event shown in the infamous 1993 Chinese exploitation film The Untold Story, which became notorious for playing up the urban legend of Huang serving up his victims to the public as a tasty snack. Like I've said in my previous videos, more often than not the truth is brushed aside in favor of a good story. If you like this video, please show your support by dropping a comment below, hitting the like button, and sharing it with your friends. If you're curious about my future content and want to hear more creepy tales, then please subscribe to my channel and hit the little bell icon so you'll be notified when I upload something new. Until next time, have a lovely day, stay safe out there, and most importantly,
stay creepy.